Okay, so, hi, I'm Sam Marshall from the Open University, one of the leading technical developers on our VLE system, and we're working on our big, scary transition to Moodle 2 at the moment. And this presentation is going to be about how we've worked together with Moodle HQ developers in order to get some of the things that we wanted done in core Moodle into the actual standard Moodle rather than having them as customizations that we've done locally. So I'm going to kind of do two things. The first is background about what we did with Moodle, our Moodle 1 system, and why that wasn't necessarily a good idea, and then what we're now trying to do with our Moodle 2 based system. So we started off with Moodle 1.6, and we're now on 1.9 obviously, but we started off 1.6. It couldn't do what the course teams wanted, and for some reason saying no to course teams, so there's the academic staff and so on, saying no didn't really always seem to be an option. Sometimes they did actually have good reasons to want something done because it was entirely sensible and obvious. Other times, not always. So we kind of got into a situation where it was like, oh my God, we can't possibly release this Moodle 1.6 system as it is. We'll have to change loads of stuff. So we did. So whenever we needed something to work differently, we hacked the core code. And we did have a good policy, this is one of the rare ones, to mark each bit of code that we changed, so with a specific comment, so we can at least find all the things we changed. We also had lots of custom plugins, which ought to be fine because Moodle's supposed to be designed to have plugins, but some of those didn't really work the way the rest of Moodle worked, and that sometimes caused problems as well. There are some positive things we did, but I'm not going to bother talking about them. So there were, as of yesterday, whenever it was I checked this, there are 2,268 OU-specific changes in core parts of OU Moodle 1.9.10. So that's not including the plugins we've written and things like that. This is just changes to bits of core code that we've had to mark in this way. And 2,268 is quite a large number. And when you do a point version upgrade, so 1.9.11, etc., there's a fairly good chance that one of the things that has changed in the core version will also be something that we fiddled with, and that means it's really difficult to do the upgrade because you've got to decide which is the correct one, and no one can remember why it was done in the first place, and it's all a disaster. There's also an issue of our plugins. So we've released some of our plugins to the community. The ones that actually work are OU Blog, OU Wiki, and ForumNG, and I think Data Plus for 1.9. And but some of our other plugins we might have sort of released, but because they relied on OU-specific changes, they don't really work, or we kind of have to do a release thing that says, well, you can use this, but you've got to install this complicated patch first, and clearly nobody's going to. So that's a bit depressing. But yeah, so I just say we serve 1 million pages a day, so something does still manage to work. So this is the wonderful new plan, Moodle 2. This time, we're going to do it properly, honest. So we've got a policy to minimize OU-specific changes. And by a policy, I mean a tedious bit of bureaucracy that developers are supposed to go through if we want to do one in order to discourage us from doing them. So we also have kind of buy-in, which is a terrible word, let's say agreement from people high up in the university that this is a good idea, that we don't hack everything because it does make us a lot more work every time we have to do an upgrade. And also if we want to, for example, include someone else's Moodle plugin and then it doesn't work, oh dear. So we do have an actual policy that we are going to minimize the number of OU-specific changes to our core code, and that does mean we occasionally are allowed to say no to things. So the required features that we do need to implement, we're trying to do as plugins. So whereas last time we had 2,200 whatever it was OU-specific changes to core code, we're probably now going to have 2,000 plugins, or maybe not, hopefully a bit less. So when we do need a core change, if it was one of those changes, so not where the course team just decided buttons had to be green for pedagogical reasons, but if it was actually, this is a good change, then we'll try and get that change into standard Moodle. Because if it's in standard Moodle, that's good for everyone, because obviously it's good for us, because we don't have to maintain it every time that core change something in the same area, and it's good for everyone else, because this wonderful new feature that was useful for us will hopefully be useful for other people too. So now, this is something that Martin kind of covered, so he's stolen my presentation, but never mind. A bit about the Moodle HQ development process that they have. I'm going to talk about it slightly differently from the way he did. So they've got a new process, and it applies to everyone, including third-party developers who want to put things into Moodle, as well as their own HQ developers also have to go through this process. basically, the way it works is, so I'm not going into sort of details of programming, but essentially, the developer writes some code and makes it public. So everything's kind of public before it goes into Moodle. We generally use, there's a site called GitHub where you can put your code. Then the maintainer, or someone with access, can submit a pull request. So a pull request is basically a request to pull the code that you've just done into the standard Moodle. So not everybody has access to do pull requests. I do. The theoretical way you're supposed to do it, let's say you want to make a change, for example, to the glossary, is you would find out who the glossary maintainer is and pester them, and they should then review your code, and then if they agree with it, then they should submit a pull request. So that's the way it's supposed to work. Then HQ developers will then review the code, and that's what Martin was talking about. So they'll probably reject it because you'll have done something wrong. But then, with luck, you'll be able to resubmit it and fix all the things they complained about, and then they might integrate it. And that's where it's documented on Moodle Docs. So that's the HQ process, what it's supposed to be. Now, what it is in practice, it's not ideal, but Moodle HQ and Martin are definitely trying to make it, it's definitely better than it was before. So if we have something we want to do to core Moodle, you put it in the Moodle bug tracker as a new feature or whatever. Or you could, if it's more complicated and you're not really sure exactly what you want to do yet, you might write a document about like what the requirements are and so on and why it's a good idea on the Moodle Docs wiki. So you can post your proposal. Then you can make it public to everyone in the general developer forum on Moodle. And with luck, you might get maybe one person replying to say, oh yeah, I like that feature as well. Could we have it, please? Because obviously that's a little bit more, if you're trying to convince Moodle HQ that the feature's a good idea, it's going to be better if there are several people and not just my university who want this feature. So you can try that. But then there is a developer Jabber chat. So that's a text chat, which if you are a developer, you may be able to get access to. In that chat, you can pester the developers who are in the chat to comment on your proposal. And with luck, someone will be really enthusiastic, and they'll say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, can you go ahead and do it? It might not always work like that, though. So if it's not generally approved, then you can change it, discuss it again till it is, or give up. If it is generally approved, you can code it and do a pull request. And then when they don't like it, you can change it again and do another pull request. So that's what actually happens in the process. And I am coming up to an example for when that didn't make too much sense. So we needed a new core feature in order to implement some of our plugins in Moodle 2. And this is actually a great feature that should help with, I think it's a great feature, but I did code it. This is a feature that I think has positive benefits for other plugin developers as well. So it kind of fits in with Martin's objective that he mentioned about making it better as a platform for plugins. So there were two kind of key points. One is, if you were looking on Moodle 1.9, on your course web page, and you've got a forum there, well, if you've turned on the feature, then supposing there are any unread messages in the forum, it shows a little brackets number of messages unread or something. Now, in Moodle 1.9, only forum can do that because there's a hack specifically somewhere in the course display code that says, check if it's a forum, and if so, do something special. So this is kind of rubbish. And we have our own forum, ForumNG, which we use instead of the standard forum. And the problem, obviously, we want ForumNG to also be able to display unread information. So we couldn't do that without changing this core code. Then the second problem was that if you write a plugin module, the only thing you could display on a course page was a link to your module. And let's say, for example, you don't want a link, and you just want to put some HTML on the course page. Well, that's what label does. But unfortunately, only the label module can do that. So we had an example use case where we want to be able to put an RSS feed in the middle of the course page so that you can already do it in a block. But we want it to have the potential to have some links from an RSS feed in the middle of a course page. So we can have a module that you add to the course page, and it actually ends up creating a block on the course page that has like 3 links in, and then they update periodically. So you couldn't do that without this because only label could display content on the course page. So that's what I was trying to make it do. And I'm not going to really go into any more technical detail about what it does. So if you do want to know, you can ask me later. So I tried to sort of think of some selling points for this in order to encourage Moodle HQ to say, oh yes, we'll put a little bit of time into reviewing this and saying you can do it. So first, it had to be acceptable for Moodle HQ. So it didn't, well actually it did, but that was a bug and I fixed it. It didn't change the existing behavior. So in other words, everyone else who was using Moodle and they didn't want to use any of these new custom modules, doesn't matter, it still works the same as it always did. Doesn't cause a significant performance problem. So in other words, if your modules don't use these features, the performance characteristics are the same as they were before. Obviously, if they do use it, it may take it a little bit longer, but that wouldn't matter because it'll only apply to people choosing to use those modules. So it's beneficial for Moodle HQ. So it's not that was it being acceptable. It's not just acceptable, it's actually beneficial because in that core code, there were some really horrible hacks to do with forum and label, which really didn't belong there. So this was genuinely improving the code as well as adding the feature. And there were some minor performance gains, which I won't go into. And it was a desirable feature as well, and not just by us. So in other words, anyone who's wanting to write a module, there's a chance that you might want to put some information on the course page, whether that's unread information or the last time it was updated or something like that. You might want to do something like that. So that's a good feature. So my first attempt was I wrote the code for part of this. And what I was trying to do was do a minimal change to that was clean, and it made as few possible changes to Moodle core code, and it was rejected, obviously. And the reason why it was rejected was, well, it was a significant change, so we didn't want to sort of put it through, it didn't require testing and so on, so we didn't want to just say, oh yeah, all right, go ahead. But it didn't have enough benefits. So this is one of the kind of interesting things that I learned, which was actually, so what usually when you're trying to get something into Moodle core, you want to do a minimal change that doesn't make any unnecessary changes. In this case, there was actually, it's maybe a special case, but there was actually a thing I didn't go far enough. So I had a second attempt after a long discussion in chat, and also somebody else, Nick Thompson from UCLA, was there and said, oh yeah, we really want this feature as well, so that was nice. And he was helpful in working out the new spec. So this time I wrote a really detailed specification, including what we're going to do for all the changes, and pestered Petter until he came up with some more comments. Third attempt. Rewrote the spec again based on the comments, and the new change basically achieves some additional things. One is reorganizes some other areas of code, which allows the code to be better documented and also to work in text editors with the code completion feature, which if you're not a programmer, you won't understand, so don't worry about it. Basically, this was some additional benefits for HQ staff. And of course, it does still achieve all our goals. In other words, we can still make forum ng display unread, and we can still display these RSS feeds. And we're actually doing a bunch of other things using this feature too. So tested it some more, and with my final spec, he actually agreed that yes, this was a good spec. So then I coded it. I was able to reuse some of the code that I'd done the first time that got rejected, but not all of it. So I made sure to write the best quality code I can write, and obviously it should go without saying that you always write the best quality code you can write, but that perhaps isn't necessarily the case. So for stuff that goes into core, I try and make it really good and follow all the Moodle coding guidelines, include all the boring ones like having the right amount of white space. Included thorough documentation in the code, and there's a key point here which is to aim to be better than existing Moodle code. So a lot of people kind of see it and they go, oh, well, there's lots of code already in Moodle that's terrible, so why should I bother making it really good? Because there's loads of stuff already there that's that bad. But I don't think the HQ developers are really taking that as a good reason to sort of say, oh, well, all right, it's not any worse than this other rubbish. I don't think they're going to follow that approach. So I think it's a good idea to write good code, basically. I also did significant testing, and I wrote a test plan, a list of things that you should go through just to check that I haven't totally broken Moodle by doing this. So there was a bit of follow-up. So this code was finally accepted and integrated into Moodle. It's in version 2.0.2. There were a few bugs with it, so I made sure to respond immediately, basically, to help fix those. I also wrote some really clear developer documentation on Moodle docs. And the idea of that is that hopefully it means they'll won't hate me and will let me do more crazy things to Moodle. They did let me do the conditional activities thing that some people seem to like, so it's not the only one. Right, so my key points really are that actually if you do want to get things into core Moodle, because I know some of the management and so on kind of thought, oh, well, it's easy, we'll do this thing, we'll show it to Moodle, they'll go, oh yeah, that's great, can we have it, and we'll just put it in. But it doesn't work like that. So I think I want to say it's a lot of work compared to just writing the code. So in this case, I kind of had 3 attempts, 2 of which involved writing code. And it took a lot longer than it would have done if I was just doing it. Another key point, this is actually one of the current problems with Moodle. It is difficult to get the attention of the developers at Moodle HQ because basically they're busy and their main job is not answering, looking at specifications that other people have written for stuff they want to do. So in order to try and get around that a bit, I had to make sure to find some benefits for HQ developers in the change. Bend over backwards to meet their concerns, keep my big developer ego in check. So basically, so I sort of feel, well, I think it should be done that way. And if Petter says, no, I think it should be done that way, I'll be like, well, all right then. So, and that's basically because, like I just said, we're making work for them. And the other thing, which was perhaps specific just to this, and it's not, because in many cases the minimal change is absolutely the best one, causes the least trouble and so on. But in this case, because it was significant enough anyway, it was worth making a better change that was slightly less minimal. So in conclusion, the final version was actually much better than the original plan because of this input from core developers, UCLA. And I also think that making changes to core code are definitely worth doing, particularly, this particular one was like a key part, and I know that our previous version of the file that has most of these changes was responsible for at least 30 or 40 of those 2,000 changes, and it was a nightmare because it did frequently change in core as well. So basically, it was really important that we didn't have these core hacks. But of course, it is also worth thinking hard first. So this applies to some of the other things we're doing. There may be, with a bit of sort of lateral thinking, you may be able to come up with a way of doing it without a core change. If you want to change something, you may be able to do it as a standard Moodle plugin, and then you won't have to go through this whole process of trying to get Moodle developers to listen to you and so on. So a lot of things we've kind of thought, well, the initial interface we kind of wanted was this one, and you can't do that without core change. But if we think, actually, this other way of doing the feature with a slightly different interface, we can do, and it will be just as good. And of course, this sort of relates to trying to make sure that your organization is in a position to say no. So in other words, if academic says it's really critical that we have this thing below that thing, but in Moodle core it's above it, you want to be able to say, no, it's going to be in the Moodle core order, don't care. Now, I know that obviously can be quite difficult, so that's the end of my presentation. I'm afraid I may have rushed through it slightly, but any questions? Okay, so in most cases, we've got a number of sort of strategies for that. So in most cases, it's a lot easier to add something than to change something. So, for example, the course settings screen, say, I don't think there's a way to change the course settings screen nicely in a plugin. So in cases where, for example, we need an extra setting that you might logically think would go on the course settings screen, we've said, well, actually, we'll build a course report that contains that setting, and that a course report is a type of plugin, and we can get it there somewhere else. The other thing, you can sometimes change core things a bit by hacking it in a theme, which is really nasty, but you can do, it kind of depends on which bit of core, but sometimes you can do horrible things in the theme. For example, we wanted to remove a lot of stuff from the navigation menu, and we have been able to do that in the theme, which is nasty, but at least we didn't have to make a core change.
Who's the best person to test and for access to the Java chat? I've got access to submit pull requests, but it'd be useful to be able to.
Well, if you've got access to submit pull requests, I think you should probably have access to Java chat. Try Helen. I can't remember her surname now. Yes. Well, I think it does depend, because I think I really didn't want to do the hack, because although I might say the ratio was 1 to 5, say, or 1 to 10 possibly, but that wouldn't count the time we'd need to do in maintenance. So if you take into account that if you did an actual hack, you would have to maintain it as well, I think the ratio gets less at least. Yeah. Thanks.
Martin mentioned in his talk that I think FormNG struggle bringing this move to 0.2, and I imagine there's much more code that than what maybe you're talking about here. Would that be a huge job to talk to them about that?
Well, to be honest, they haven't. I don't think they've really looked at it in detail yet. I have sent them it. they know about it. So I think the situation's a little bit. It's maybe a little bit better if we're talking about kind of putting in something wholesale, because FormNG is sort of an independent plugin. It doesn't affect bits of core Moodle, so it won't break anything else probably. So if you've kind of got agreement to do something wholesale that's sort of yours, then it's a little bit less stringent, because once you've sort of got agreement, well, do this, then fine. But I don't know how FormNG is going to work, whether they're intending to do their own forum based on FormNG or whether they actually want us to do it. I don't know.
He didn't make hint whether he was going to directly try and reuse code, or he did mention a couple of other things as well. Rubrics. And he said he's looking at some rubrics that are out there and taking the best features. And I don't know whether that makes re-engineering them, reverse engineering them themselves, or
I think for rubrics he meant doing it from scratch, but basing it sort of looking at what other people had done to get the specification right. But for FormNG, I don't think there's any decisions, so I don't know.
One of the big problems, because you're kind of looking at it from the developer perspective,
Yeah.
and you talk about harnessing to other people's support for it. Is that problem is looking at the Moodle issue queues is like this completely scary experience for somebody who doesn't know what this is about. It's also sort of a little. It's hard to tell apart the major sort of new feature from a little sort of black face, even though it may be critical, but they're completely differing on scale. And there's actually no way that I can, for instance, tell our tutors to go in there and comment on something that goes on, because I myself find it just too time consuming the way it's structured. One place where I actually go very often and do give comments on developers is Dropbox. They have a vote box feature where you go in, and it's been very easy to say, which are the more popular features that people are asking for, and then they're tagged as which ones are actually not being considered for future development, which ones are being worked on, and which ones are being which have already been implemented. It's just so very easy because they break it up into categories.
Yeah.
So so particularly when you go new forums, if you have just one new forum thing that people will be putting in for features, and there's commenting functionality as well, but it's very much a user-friendly environment, and people have like this certain amount of points, so they can't just go give 10 points to everything. They have to sort of budget their points, and it works.
Well, I mean, in Moodle Tracker you can vote for things. I think the Moodle Tracker is definitely a sort of it's not something that an ordinary user could use, but they're just using Jira commercial software, so.
But this would not be necessarily to be integrated with the developers, but somewhere where the developers who are working on new features and they want to get some feedback from the community, or that I think would be a good way. Because I think our students and people say, go there, see what's being proposed, and give comments as real users of this thing rather than just kind of
I think the Moodle Developer Forum is not bad for that in a sense. So, because the forums are at least easier to use than the tracker is. But yeah, I mean, there is always kind of an issue that actually you don't want people telling you what they want because there's no time to do it anyway. So.
do you still have to look after the code that you put through at that time now, or do you just forget about it and look after it? Do you maybe you have an in with them now because they will come up to you?
I think, well, there is, to some extent, I think there's a bit of a statute of limitations, but because they've had to review it in detail, so it's not like I'm the only person who can do it. So, I mean, I probably would want to help if there were actual bugs in it, but not necessarily if they wanted to improve it. So I couldn't hear. Oh yeah. Yeah. No. There's a lot of people kind of complain, and it is just the way Moodle works. So a lot of people say, oh, well, I've seen it in Drupal, and it worked this way, and I want to do it that way. And it's like, well, sorry, this is Moodle, you've got to do it the other way. I mean, that's just my opinion. Obviously, you'd have to ask Martin, but basically, I think you'd be waiting for Moodle 3 for that. So I don't know if you noticed how long Moodle 2 took. But yeah. Yeah, particularly if it's just a visual change, yeah.
I'm just interested in
is a really big improvement. In the past, essentially, basically the big improvement is that there is now a way to get core developers' attention that they are specifically scheduled to do, and that is this pull request. So before, you could file a bug and you could put a patch on it, so you know you had the code, and no one would ever look at it, and you could maybe pester them, and if they happen to be kind of feeling nice that day, they would maybe look at it, but quite often they wouldn't. Whereas now, at least with a pull request, someone will definitely look at it. I mean, even if they reject it, you know, they have at least looked at it. So I think it's an improvement, but I'm sure there might still be some way to go.
Thanks, Adam. That was very interesting on the new developments there. We're going